Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. Story 1. It was midnight when Grant Keller leaned into the old-fashioned mic inside the WKRC 93.5 booth and said the words he'd been repeating every night for the past 7 years. You're listening to Midnight Static on WARC, where the lonely find company and the darkness listens back. The low hum of static rolled into the next slow jazz track, and Grant sank back into his cracked leather chair with a yawn, watching the red on air light dim. The studio was quiet, save for the faint crackle of vinyl and the occasional gust of wind scraping against the one narrow window. WKRC was a relic, an analog island in a sea of digital noise. Most towns have moved on to podcast networks and streaming platforms, but this corner of Oregon still clung to the comfort of static and signal. Grant didn't mind. The isolation suited him. After a messy divorce, a nervous breakdown in an industry that had all but forgotten him, being a night DJ in a town of under 3,000 people was the closest thing to peace he'd found. He stretched, poured himself another cup of coffee from the scorch pot, and checked the request line. 3 voicemails blinked on the old call box. He hit play. The first was a regular, a woman named Edna, who called every other night to request anything by Patsy Cline and give unsolicited advice about Grant's love life. The second was from a trucker passing through town, asking for a Springsteen deep cut. The third was silence. No, not silence. Breathing, slow, steady, right up against the mic. Grant leaned in instinctively. Then a voice, low, raspy, calculated. Play track 16 from a Midnight Confessions vinyl. You still have it. You know the one. Play it at exactly 12:33 a.m. Click. Grant froze. No name, no callback number, just a request, and that voice. It wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Something about the rhythm, the way it pronounced the numbers, like whoever was on the other end had been rehearsing. He glanced at the old crate of records behind him. Sure enough, tucked near the back was Midnight Confessions, a 1977 compilation of obscure soul and blues ballads. Dusty, untouched since he first unpacked it. He pulled it out and flipped to side B. Track 16 wasn't even listed. Just a scratchy etching in the vinyl that read for G. His gut twitched. Still, he queued it up. Curiosity always outweighed good judgment in his world. At exactly 12:33 a.m., as instructed, Grant slid the fader and let the track ride. No music, just faint static and something beneath it. Whispers? A distorted voice? He leaned closer. The body was found by the creek. Her hands tied with phone wire, blue dress, missing left shoe. The voice faded, swallowed by static again. Then it ended. Grant sat there, his fingers hovering over the controls, heart tapping out a rhythm against his ribs. That wasn't a song. That was a crime scene report. But not just any. He remembered hearing about that one years ago. It happened just outside their town. A woman named Carla Reese, found by the water, strangled. Case never solved. The only place those details were mentioned was a brief article in the Oregon Saddleback in 1995. The phone wire, the missing shoe. The public didn't know that. So, how the hell was it on a record? He picked up the vinyl again, studied the grooves. No labels, no production info, nothing. Just for G in the wax. His name was Grant. Nobody else worked this booth. Who the hell made this? He barely slept that night. The next evening, as he settled into the booth again, a feeling of unease prickled the back of his neck. He told himself it was nothing, some prankster or bored local. But the tension lingered. He found himself checking the locks on the doors twice, pulling the blinds closed even though nobody could see inside from the parking lot. At 12:07 a.m., the phone rang. Not the voicemail box, the red rotary landline. Nobody used that. He stared at it, debating whether to answer. He picked up. WARC, he said slowly. I have another request, said the same voice from the night before. Grant's mouth dried out. Who is this? Play track 22. Same record. Same time, 12:33. Click. No time for questions. No name. just instructions. He waited, and at 12:33 a.m., he dropped the needle on track 22. This time, the voice was clearer. A man describing in cold, clinical detail how he bludgeoned someone in their home, mentioned the house, a dog barking, a thunderstorm outside. The exact time of death, 3:14 a.m. Grant listened, transfixed. Something about the voice chilled him more than the content. It was so familiar, not the same as the caller, but something inside it echoed, a cadence he couldn't place. That murder had happened 3 towns over in 2004. Again, never solved. The only surviving detail that matched, the dog. No reports ever confirmed it publicly, but Grant remembered hearing that the victim's neighbor had mentioned a barking dog. These weren't pranks. These were confessions, and they were old, very old. The next few nights followed the same pattern. A call, a request, a track, a murder, sometimes recent, sometimes decades old, all unsolved, all terrifyingly accurate. Grant started to dig. At first, he thought he could rationalize it. Maybe it was someone trying to get famous, a copycat obsessed with old cases. But these were too precise, too personal. He began to lose sleep, started marking a map on the wall behind his booth, sticking pins into each location mentioned on the tapes. The pattern formed a ring, always within 100 miles of the station, like the signal itself was feeding them. Then came the call that made it all too real. It was a Thursday. The air was heavy. Rain slammed the station windows like fists. Grant sat hunched over the console, eyes red-rimmed from insomnia, when the red phone rang again. Play track 31. The voice said, "Listen closely." Grant didn't ask questions anymore. He just obeyed. The voice on track 31 was different. It was crying. "I didn't mean to kill her," it said, barely a whisper beneath the hiss. She just wouldn't stop screaming. I panicked. I buried her under the old water tower. Please, I can't sleep. I see her eyes when I close mine. God help me. Grant paused the tape. The old water tower had been decommissioned for years, off the map, condemned, but it was still standing, and it was only 15 minutes away. He stared at the address scribbled on the notepad, then at the mic, then back at the clock. 12:45 a.m. Something told him if he waited, someone else might die. He grabbed his coat, stuffed the vinyl into its sleeve, and bolted out into the storm. The road was slick. Fog hugged the asphalt like a blanket. His headlights barely pierced it. As he approached the turnoff near the old mill road, the tower loomed ahead, rusted, skeletal, silhouetted against the lightening sky. He parked, got out, slipped twice in the mud as he made his way toward the base of the structure. The ground was soft, like it had been disturbed recently. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his hands. It didn't take long. The shallow grave gave way to fabric, then flesh. A body, fresh, a woman, blonde, blue blouse, dirt-stained. He stumbled back, hands trembling, called 911. They arrived 20 minutes later. Grant gave his statement, tried to explain everything, the calls, the records, the details, but the officer just stared at him like he was hallucinating. There's no record of any vinyl matching that description, the officer said later. No known pressings, and we found no fingerprints on the body. No ID, no missing person report filed. He was told to go home, that they'd follow up, that it might be a misunderstanding, but he knew better. Back at the station, he examined the vinyl again. This time, something was different. A new track, not etched, burned. Track 40, next one. He didn't remember seeing that before. The groove was jagged, warped, almost unnatural. His hands shook as he placed it on the turntable. At 12:33 a.m., he played it, and the voice that came through wasn't just familiar. It was his. "She's next," the voice said. The one at the diner. Red hair, Always leaves at 11:45. She sees me. I can't let her talk. I can't. The voice cracked. I don't remember doing it. I don't remember anything after the rain started. But I found the mud on my shoes, the blood on my sleeve. I think I did it. I think I did it all. Grant couldn't breathe. He staggered away from the console, knocking over the coffee mug. His mind reeled. Was this a joke? A breakdown? Was he losing time? The next morning, he drove to the diner, sat in the lot, watched the red-haired waitress exit. Just like the tape said, she looked at him and smiled, friendly, unknowing. He drove away before she saw the tears in his eyes. That night, the red phone rang again. Same voice, calm, cold. You ready for the next one, Grant? Click. Grant didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard his own voice echoing through the hiss of static, calm, emotionless, methodical. The words repeated over and over in his dreams, crawling under his skin like cold fingers. She sees me. I can't let her talk. I think I did it. I think I did it all. He stopped going home. The studio became his world, his coffin, his confessional. He taped up the windows. He unplugged the phone. He moved the couch from the lounge into the booth and tried to convince himself it was just exhaustion. Sleep deprivation could mimic schizophrenia, right? It could make you hallucinate voices, make you believe things that weren't there. But the vinyl was there. The tracks were real. And worst of all, they kept changing. Every night, new ones appeared. Not added, but revealed like they had been there the whole time, just buried beneath layers of dust and wax. Track 41 appeared the next night, then track 42, each more disturbing than the last. Each one with new details, new voices, but it was always the same theme: murder, confession, guilt. And slowly, the voices were beginning to sound more and more like Grant. It wasn't just his tone, it was the way they pronounced words, the same pauses, the same cough he had when he was tired, the way he said murder with that slight upward lilt at the end, like a question. It wasn't just coincidence. He started checking old station logs, dates, playlist sheets, archive tapes from previous broadcasts. He found entire segments he didn't remember recording, hours of him rambling on air, his voice calm, flat, robotic. He would play music, then suddenly talk about death, about isolation, about feeling like he was disappearing. Sometimes he mentioned names of victims, names that hadn't even appeared in the news yet. And still, he couldn't remember a single word of it. One evening, desperate for answers, Grant called his own doctor, told him he was having blackouts, that he was worried something was seriously wrong. The doctor, an old friend named Ruben, told him coming the next morning. But that night, the red phone rang again. This time there was no voice, just the sound of a ticking clock, then a scream, then Grant's voice again. Ruben is next. He knows too much. He's been watching. He saw the blood under your nails. Click. Grant slammed the phone down, heart hammering. His hands were shaking. He looked at them, at his nails, dirt, dust, but also red, faint, dry streaks of it. He ran to the bathroom in the back hallway, scrubbed his hands until his skin burned. Then he sat on the floor, knees to his chest, rocking slightly as he whispered to himself, I didn't kill anyone. I didn't. I couldn't. But even as he said it, something in his chest refused to believe it. Something deeper, older, like a door inside his brain that had been locked for decades, was finally creaking open. The next day, Ruben didn't answer his phone. By nightfall, WKRC was surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. Grant watched from the shadows inside the booth as they pulled Ruben's car from the river. The windows shattered, his body limp in the driver's seat, a large gash across his temple. The official story would say he lost control in the rain, but Grant had a different theory. He went back to the record. Track 43 was waiting. He didn't even hesitate this time. He dropped the needle. He kept asking questions. The voice said. He wrote prescriptions, thought he could help, thought he could fix me, but he couldn't. No one can. They have to go, all of them, before they expose it, before they remember. Grant stared at the wall. Before they remember. What did that mean? That night, he dreamed of the radio station, but it wasn't the one he knew. It was older, dimmer. The walls were made of concrete. There were no records, no digital displays, just a single microphone and a tape machine, constantly looping static. He was strapped to a chair. A man in a lab coat was standing in front of him. "You're doing well, Grant," the man said. "Very well. We've almost reached the end of phase 3. Grant tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't move. The man leaned closer. "Let's see what you remember now." He flipped the switch on the machine, and the screaming began. Grant woke up in a cold sweat, tangled in the sheets of the lounge couch, the sound of static still ringing in his ears. He didn't know what was real anymore. Was he a murderer? Was he sleepwalking through crimes and confessing them through records he didn't remember making? Or was someone using him, planting these things, warping a sense of reality? There had to be answers. He needed to dig deeper. He started by tearing the station apart, looking for anything, hidden cameras, microphones, old documents, anything that could explain what was happening. He found something behind the acoustic panel in the back wall of the booth, a file, an old manila envelope with a faded stamp on the front. Project Echo Room, Phase 2 clearance only. Inside were pages of typed notes, medical reports, audio transcription log, and a photo of him, younger, maybe in his 20s, wearing a hospital gown, eyes glazed, strapped to a chair in a padded room. The caption read, Subject 003, Grant Keller. His hands trembled as he read the notes. Subject has responded well to hypnosis-based memory suppression. Test broadcast indicates successful post-hypnotic suggestion activation via coded audio cues embedded in analog signals. Further down, secondary personalities appear stable. No conscious recollection of core behaviors. Believes self to be a DJ. Suggests implantation of confessional triggers via curated vinyl. The final note was dated 15 years ago. Transition to Phase 3, live field testing. Subject relocated to WKRC facility for real-world trial. Monitor confessional patterns and time gaps between activation. He couldn't breathe. His whole life, this town, this job, this station, none of it was real. He was a lab rat, an experiment. They had made him this way, made him forget, made him kill. And worst of all, they were still watching, still triggering him. He staggered out of the booth, mind spinning, and collapsed outside in the rain. The night air slapped him awake. Thunder rolled in the distance. He remembered something then. Not a full memory, just a flash. A girl's face, pale, scared, reaching toward him, pleading. He had a rock in his hand, blood on his shirt. He screamed and clutched his head. "Make it stop," he shouted into the sky. "Get out of my head." But there was no answer, only the wind. That night, the phone rang again. He didn't answer. He couldn't. But the voicemail recorded automatically. He played it back an hour later. The voice was different this time. Feminine. Cold. "You're almost there, Grant. Don't fight it. The truth will find you, whether you want it to or not. Check the locker at the bus depot. You left something behind." Click. It was after 2 a.m. But Grant didn't care. He drove. The roads were dead. The whole town seemed like it had been swallowed by fog. Not a single light in the windows, not even at the gas station. When he reached the depot, it was locked, but he still had a key from the cleaning job he worked briefly when he first moved to town, or so he thought. Now, he wasn't even sure that was real. The locker room was cold. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. Locker 13 was halfway open. Inside, there was a tape recorder, an old reel-to-reel unit. Attached was a note. "You used to be good at listening. Time to remember." He took it back to the studio, plugged it in, press play. Static, then footsteps, then his own voice, young, confused. "Where am I? Who are you people?" Then another voice, the same man from the dream. "You are part of something very important, Grant. We're going to help you become what you were always meant to be." Why can't I remember anything? Because remembering is dangerous. But don't worry. You'll only remember when it's time. The tape clicked, and suddenly, everything fell into place. The vinyl, the voices, the murders, it was all orchestrated. Every confession was real, but they weren't someone else's. They were his, broadcast to the world not to be stopped, but to be heard, to fulfill the final phase of the experiment. The perfect killer who doesn't know he's killing, who only remembers after it's too late. The perfect broadcast weapon. He sat there in the dark, staring at the spinning reels, and then the studio door creaked open. Grant turned. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman in a gray trench coat. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Hello, Grant," she said. "Do you remember me?" He didn't, but something in his bones recognized her. "You were there," he whispered. "In the room." She nodded. "You were our most promising subject. We thought we lost you after the third phase, but you did better than expected. Much better." He stood up, fists clenched. "You made me do this. You turned me into a mirror," she said calmly. "We didn't turn you into anything. We just removed the walls. What came out was already inside." Grant looked down at his hands. He didn't know if the blood on them was old or new. Did it matter? "You've activated the last track," she said. "There's no turning back now, but you do have a choice." "What choice?" "Finish the broadcast," she said, "or destroy the record." She placed a lighter on the desk, and then she walked out, leaving him alone with the record. Grant didn't move for a long time after she left. The lighter sat on the desk like a loaded gun. The record still spun in the booth behind the glass, needle lifted, ready to drop on the final track, track 44. He didn't want to know what it said. He already knew, not in words, but in weight. It was inside him now, a black seed splitting open. The room was so quiet it was loud. Every creak of the old floorboards, every hum of the console amps sounded like thunder. Outside, the storm had finally passed, but the sky was still dark, unnaturally so, as if the sun had forgotten to rise. Grant stood, walked slowly into the booth. The vinyl gleamed under the dim red light. He stared at the label. The text had changed again. This time, there was no title, just one word etched into the wax, faint and jagged like it had been scratched in with a knife. Confession. He looked at the turntable, then at the lighter. His hand trembled. He picked it up. The flame flickered to life, and he held it to the edge of the record. But the wax didn't melt. It hissed, like flesh. Then he heard a voice, not from the speakers, not from the booth, from behind him. "Are you ready, Grant?" He turned. No one, just darkness. Then the door slammed shut behind him, and the lights cut out. For a second, there was only silence. Then the record started spinning, on its own. The needle dropped, and the voice began. This time it wasn't his. It was hers, the woman in the trench coat. Calm, cold, commanding. Subject 003. Phase 4 activation complete. This is the final directive. There was a click, like a tape switching reels. You were chosen not for who you are, but for who you could become. Every crime, every voice, every confession was a fragment of the mirror we built inside your mind. Each track, a shard. Each broadcast, a test. Another click, then a different voice. His again, but younger, unaware. Why me? Why are you doing this? The answer came instantly. Because you were already broken. Grant stumbled back, shaking his head. No, I wasn't. You did this. You made me. But the voices kept coming. Layered, overlapping. Dozens of them now. All his. "I don't remember her face," she screamed when I grabbed her. "I watched the blood swirl down the drain. I didn't feel anything." That scared me more than the killing. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. I didn't want this, but the record played on. And now, something new bled through the voices. Music, a slow, haunting piano melody. It was the same song he used to play every night at midnight. Back when the show was normal. Back when he thought he was normal. But now it sounded wrong, twisted. The notes bent slightly, off-key, like the record itself was warping under pressure. And then he heard something that froze his blood. A girl's voice, small, frightened, from far away. "Grant, why did you hurt me?" He opened his eyes, and the studio was gone. He was back in the dream, the padded room. Only now it wasn't a dream. It was real, He was strapped to the chair again. The tape machine spun beside him, and across from him stood a mirror, but there was no reflection. Only the girl, pale, young, her eyes wide and wet. She was in the room, inside the mirror. She reached out toward him. "Don't let them take me again," he screamed, and the world shattered. When he came to, he was back in the studio. The record had stopped spinning. The booth glass was cracked. His hands were bleeding. He didn't remember hitting it, but there were pieces of it in his palms. The red phone rang. He picked it up. This time, he didn't say anything. The voice on the other end did. "You're ready now." He recognized it, his own voice, but colder, more complete. "Tonight's the final show," it said. "They're all listening, waiting. Finish the confession." Click. Grant stood in the center of the studio. He knew what he had to do. He walked over to the main mic, flipped the broadcast switch. The red on air light glowed for the last time. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is Grant Keller, and if you're hearing this, you already know too much." He paused. The words poured out of him, slow at first, then unstoppable. "I was never a DJ. I was a weapon, a vessel, a lie. They built me to be a story told over the airwaves, a confession no one could trace, a voice that felt too familiar to forget. They fed me voices, names, deaths, and I played them because I didn't know who I was without them." His voice cracked. "I've killed people. I don't remember all of it, but I remember her. The little girl in the mirror. She was real. I think she was the first." He wiped his face. "I think they made me kill her to break me, to fracture my mind. And it worked. But even broken mirrors can still reflect." He looked at the record. "I'm not finishing the track. Not the way they want." He struck the lighter again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He lit the edge of the record, and it screamed. The sound that came out wasn't wax melting. It was voices, dozens, hundreds, howling in agony. The record didn't melt. It burned like paper. The flames spread across the console, licking at the wires, the walls, the soundproof foam. The studio filled with smoke. The fire alarm never rang. No sprinklers, just fire, as if the building itself was ready to die with him. He sat back in the booth, watching the flames climb. And as they reached the ceiling, he laughed. Not in joy, but in freedom. Because the voices were gone now, silent. Finally, then everything went black. They found the station 3 days later, burned to ground. The fire had been intense, but strangely contained. None of the surrounding buildings were damaged. Inside the wreckage, they found one thing intact. The microphone. No body, no bones, just the mic. And the red phone, still connected, still warm. WKRC was shut down for good. Official cause, electrical fire, equipment failure. No one looked too deeply. But in the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen. People in town reported picking up strange frequencies on their car radios. Late at night, always the same voice. Soft, calm, familiar. "I'm still here," it would say. "I never left." Sometimes, it would play that piano melody, distorted. And if you turned the dial just right, between the static, you'd hear a scream, then a girl's voice. "Don't let them take me again." Then silence, forever. It had been weeks since the fire, but the town hadn't gone quiet. If anything, it had become louder in all the wrong ways. Hollow winds whispered through the abandoned streets after sundown. Radios and gas stations flickered to life with static, even when unplugged. And somewhere in the air, like an itch in the back of everyone's throat, Grant Keller's voice lingered, though no one dared say his name out loud anymore. Everyone just called it the station. As in, "Did you hear the station last night?" No one wanted to admit they listened. No one wanted to admit they couldn't stop, because the broadcast hadn't stopped. They'd only changed. Now, it didn't matter what dial you were on. At exactly 2:17 a.m., any radio could catch the signal. Briefly, it was always the same pattern. A song, distorted, old, then a voice. Not Grant's anymore. Not exactly. It was someone else, almost like a combination. The tone was soft, but there was something inside it, like oil on water, something sliding around beneath the surface. People heard different things. Some heard names whispered in between the notes. Others heard screams. But one man heard instructions. His name was Jericho Vance, and he wasn't from the town. He was a drifter, a hitchhiker, a man with no past, and he was already broken. That's what made him perfect. The first night, he picked up the signal. He was sleeping in the back of a stolen pickup, just outside a diner in Wyoming. The truck's radio was dead, the battery nearly drained. But at 2:17 a.m., the dashboard lights blinked once, the speakers crackled, and a voice came through. Not a song, not a call, a whisper. Hello, Jericho. He didn't know how they knew his name. He thought he was dreaming. But when he opened his eyes, the radio knob was turning on its own. Click, static, click. Then the melody, the same warped piano that once closed every midnight confession show. Then the voice returned. Welcome to the next broadcast. He sat up, heart hammering. He tried turning it off. The knob broke off in his hand. The voice continued. You've heard the signal. You've been chosen. He tried to get out of the truck. The doors locked. Automatically, the windows fogged. And the voice spoke directly to his mind now. Inside, without air, you will find the first target at 104 Pine Street. He wears a badge but hides a lie. He must confess before the fire takes him. Jericho didn't remember getting out of the truck, didn't remember finding the house, but he remembered the fire. He remembered the screams. And above it all, he remembered the song playing on a radio in the hallway, untouched by the flames. After that night, he couldn't sleep, not because of the guilt, because of the silence. He missed the voice. He waited every night for the signal, and it always came. Always at 2:17, always with a name, always with fire. He wasn't the only one. All across the country, radios began waking people up. Not all of them followed the voice, but the ones who did were never the same. They didn't leave bodies behind, only burn marks, charred rooms, and always an untouched radio, still playing static. The media never caught the pattern. The government never issued warnings, because no one believed the same thing was happening in so many different towns, in so many different ways. But she knew, the woman in the trench coat. She hadn't died in the fire. She'd never been real, not in the human sense. She was an idea made flesh, a handler, a conductor, and now she was everywhere the signal reached. Sometimes people saw her standing at the edge of a parking lot, just before a blaze. Sometimes she showed up on security footage, always a blur, always watching. But the one person who saw her clearly was Jericho, and he was starting to remember things he'd never lived, voices he'd never spoken, places he'd never been. One night, he found himself standing outside a gutted radio station, or what was left of it. He didn't remember driving there, didn't remember the state, lines crossed, but he knew the name, WKRC. There was nothing left but rubble and ash. And in the center, buried beneath a blackened beam, was a microphone, untouched. He picked it up, and the moment his fingers closed around it, he heard the voice again. Only this time, it was Grant. Welcome back, Grant said. Jericho stumbled back, dropping the mic, but the voice didn't stop. You're the next host. No, Jericho whispered. I'm not like you. You're exactly like me. That's why the signal chose you. The sky above him buzzed with electricity. He looked up and saw a radio tower, not broken, not burned, standing tall, gleaming with fresh steel. It hadn't been there before. He stepped toward it, drawn, like a moth to flame. Inside, the lights were already on. The studio was clean, modern, waiting, and on the console was a single record, label blank, needle hovering. He sat down, stared at the switch. The red on air light blinked softly, not lit yet, not fully, not until he spoke. He looked at the mic, and for a moment he saw his own reflection, but it wasn't him. It was Grant, smiling, and behind him, her, the woman in the trench coat, watching, always watching. Jericho reached for the switch. His hand hovered, shaking. He could still walk away, could still run, but the music had already started. Soft, low, calling. He flipped the switch. The red light clicked on, and the voice inside him spoke. Welcome to Midnight Confession. This is your host, Jericho Vance, and tonight we're going to talk about what you did. Somewhere, far away, radios crackled to life. Every clock read 2:17. The signal had found its new voice, and it was never going to stop. Story 2. The body in apartment 14B. No one remembered when the first complaint started. Maybe it was the smell, or the humming, or the way the hallway lights near 14B flickered every night at the same time. But by the time the building manager took notice, half the tenants on the 14th floor had already moved out, and the other half avoided that side of the hallway altogether. 14B had been sealed since 1986. No tenant, no key. Not even the super had access anymore. The door had been painted shut 3 times over, but the paint never seemed to stick. The wood beneath was always damp, as if something inside the apartment was sweating through the years. The building was old, 60 years of rust-groaning pipes and rotting carpets. It stood just off Merrow Street, tucked between a burned-out grocery store and a pawn shop that never opened. They called it the Holloway Arms, but no one said that out loud. Most just called it the place with the room. Apartment 14B had no windows, no fire escape, and no listed square footage on the official blueprints. It shouldn't exist, but it did. And on March 3rd, at exactly 3:13 a.m., someone knocked on its door. The knock was heard by 3 tenants. Each reported the same thing. 3 knocks, slow, even, then silence. No footsteps, no shadow under the door, just absence. Dale Morgan, a retired electrician who lived in 14A, was the first to speak to management. He said the smell was worse than usual. Said he couldn't sleep because of the whispers. They asked what kind of whispers. He said it sounded like someone reading a list of names, over and over, each one spoken like a sigh. He gave them a name from the list, Tasha Relman. The building manager blinked. Tasha Relman was a tenant in 14C. She died 2 nights ago, slipped in the shower, snapped her neck. No foul play, except Dale said he heard her name the night before it happened. 2 days later, he added another name, Gary Linwood, tenant in 13F, dead of a heart attack the next day. He added a 3rd name, then a 4th. Every time, the tenant died within 24 hours. Management called the police. The police laughed until the 5th death. Then they brought in a locksmith, a camera crew, and a detective named Ross Talbot, who didn't believe in curses, ghosts, or urban legends, just bodies, timelines, and facts. He stood outside 14B with a flashlight and a crowbar, staring at the swollen door frame. The hallway was silent, but every tenant on the floor was awake. Some watched through their peepholes. Others pressed their ears to the walls. Everyone wanted to know what was inside. Talbot peeled back the layers of paint and rot. The door creaked open, inch by inch. The stench at first, not like rot, not like mold, something worse, like time had soured. The room beyond was dark, but not empty. A single lamp flickered in the far corner, unplugged, yet still glowing. And in the middle of the room, seated in a green vinyl chair, was a man, or what was left of him. The body was dry, almost mummified, dressed in a brown suit, tie crooked, eyes gone, but his mouth was open, mid-sentence, like he'd been caught speaking when death arrived. In his lap sat a thick leather-bound journal, open to the final page. Talbot stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. The lamp went out. He turned on his flashlight. The beam trembled in his hand. The wallpaper peeled away from the walls like skin. The air was dense, clotted with dust and something invisible that pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. He approached the body. The name tag on the suit read, Edgar M. Henley. Beside the chair, stacked neatly in a pile, were 17 other journals, identical, each numbered in gold ink. The open book in his lap read, Volume 18. Talbot read the first few lines. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Each page listed a name, a date, a time, and a description of death, painfully accurate. The most recent entry read, Dale Morgan, April 8th, 3:17 a.m., suffocation. No sign of struggle. Talbot blinked. It was April 7th, and Dale Morgan was very much alive. He looked closer. The next entry was already half written. The pen was still in the corpse's hand, but the handwriting wasn't the same as the earlier pages. It changed with each volume. 18 volumes, 18 different scripts, different pressure, different ink, like each one had been written by a different hand. Talbot turned back a few pages. Some names were underlined, each with a single note beneath. Refused, denied, incomplete. He flipped to the front cover. There was a date, July 12, 1986, the supposed date of Henley's death, except the entry dated July 13, 1986 read, Tenant 14B, Edgar M. Henley, death by silence, confession incomplete. Talbot stared at it. How could Henley write his own death after he was dead? Unless someone else did it. He glanced at the journals. All of them were filled to the last page. No blood, no damage, just writing. Volume I had names from 1986. Volume 2, 1987. Year after year. Volume 17 ended in 2022. And now, Volume 18. Talbot's fingers trembled as he touched the pen. The room was silent, but his ears buzzed. He looked at the body again. It hadn't moved, but its mouth looked slightly more closed. He backed away, out into the hallway, called for backup. No one came. He tried the radio. Dead. His flashlight flickered, then burst. The hallway was black. Only the smell remained. He turned around. The door to 14B was gone. Just wall, as if the apartment had swallowed itself. But he was still holding the journal and the pen. He tried to drop them, but his hands wouldn't listen. His fingers curled tighter around the spine. Against his will, he opened it to the next blank page, and the pen scratched forward. One name, Ross Talbot. No, he tried to stop. His other hand grabbed his wrist, but it kept writing. April 9th, 2:46 a.m., suicide, throat cut. He screamed, but no sound came. Behind him, he felt the breath of someone who'd never left. A whisper. You wrote it. Now make it real. The pen clattered to the floor, and the door reappeared. Open. Waiting. He stumbled out. Collapsed. They found him 2 hours later, rambling, holding the book, the page still warm. No one believed him. They buried Henley, locked the room again, painted it shut, but the smell returned. So did the whispers. And 2 weeks later, Ross Talbot cut his throat in his apartment bathroom. No note, only the book, open to the correct page, and a new one beneath it. Apartment 15D, Melissa Trent, April 12th, 4:01 a.m., fire in bed. Accidental. Melissa lived alone. No candles, no gas appliances. She died in her sleep. The fire department found no cause, only ash, and the journal, neatly placed at her feet. It had been 8 days since Melissa Trent's apartment turned to blackened bone and heat. The wallpaper in her hallway still peeled away from the heat, but somehow the frame of her bed remained intact. The fire had licked everything else into soot, yet her body was untouched, positioned like a doll at rest. No screaming, no burns, just charred lungs, as if the flame had only ever existed inside her. The journal sat on the nightstand, volume 18. Its pages were as clean as ever, save for the two most recent names. A third name was written now. No one saw who wrote it. Alvin Cross, April 14th, 12:33 a.m., collapse of the skull. Alvin was 73. He had lived on the 12th floor since 1992. Widowed, kind, he fed the alley cats, helped carry groceries. He had never even visited the 14th floor. And yet, the morning of April 14th, the building's janitor found Alvin in the laundry room, blood spreading like a halo around his head. The back of his skull caving like porcelain dropped on tile. No weapon, no blood trail, just a clean surgical implosion. The book sat next to the vending machine, resting on top of the snack slot. Alvin's name, again, was accurate, and beside it, another new line already forming. Oscar Bellman, April 15th, 2:01 a.m., drowned in air. Oscar was a tenant no one really knew. Lived in 16B, kept to himself, clean, quiet, but he hadn't drowned, not technically. When EMTs found him, he was blue, curled beneath his dining table. No water, no bruises, no marks, lungs full of fluid, not a single drop on the floor. They called it acute pulmonary edema, but the journal called it something else, drowned in air, and it had predicted the exact time. By then, word had spread. No longer just whispers behind doors. People were panicking. Half the tenants packed up overnight. The other half stared at their clocks, waiting for 3:13 a.m., praying they wouldn't hear knocks from 14B. The room hadn't reopened since the night Ross Talbot lost his mind. Yet the journal kept writing, and it never skipped a night. One name, every day, always someone inside Holloway Arms. One by one, the building was being emptied, not by movers, but by death. And yet, the door to 14B remained shut, as if mocking everyone, as if it was no longer needed. That's when Jonah Craig moved in. He wasn't told the building's history, just that the rent was low. He'd been evicted 2 weeks prior, jobless, grieving the loss of his older brother, a veteran who vanished during a hiking trip and was declared dead in absentia. Jonah didn't believe in ghosts, or at least, he didn't until the first night. At 3:13 a.m., he heard the knock, not at 14B, but at his own door. 3 slow knocks, no one outside, no footsteps down the hall. He told himself it was a prank, but he couldn't shake the cold. The next day, he found a small notebook on his kitchen table, worn but familiar. He didn't own it, and it hadn't been there when he left earlier that morning. It looked identical to the one mentioned in the news, the one that predicted deaths. That had vanished with each victim. This one had only a few pages filled. One of them bore his name, Jonah Craig, April 16th, 3:03 a.m., internal rupture of the chest cavity. No signs of external injury. He laughed. He had to, because the alternative was insanity. He checked his body. Normal. He ran to his neighbor's door, an old man named Mr. Keegan, and showed him the entry. Keegan had seen too much in this place. He didn't laugh. Instead, he told Jonah about Ross Talbot and Edgar Henley and the door. Then, Mr. Keegan handed Jonah a sealed envelope. I was told to give this to the next name that shows up. Inside the envelope was a photograph, aged, bent, faded. It showed apartment 14B as it looked in 1986. There were 6 people in the photo. The 5th was Edgar Henley. The 6th was Jonah. Same face, same eyes, a little younger. But it was him. He dropped the picture. That's not possible. Keegan nodded slowly. No one remembers moving in, just waking up here one day. That night, Jonah didn't sleep. He watched the clock tick closer, the 3:03 a.m., felt his pulse rise, felt something under his skin, an ache in the center of his chest. He went to the bathroom, checked the mirror. Something was pulsing behind his ribs, moving. He pulled up his shirt. No marks, but his reflection didn't copy him. It smiled when he didn't. He smashed the mirror, ran back to the notebook, turned the page. Now the date had changed. April 17th. Jonah Craig, suicide by reentry. He stared at the words. What did that mean? What was reentry? Then he noticed something on the spine of the journal. Not volume 18, but 19, the 19th volume. New script, new hand. He was a writer now. Somehow, the journal had passed him, and if he was writing it, then maybe he could change the names. He flipped back to the previous pages, scratched out one. Nothing happened. No sound. No ripple in the air. But when he turned the page again, a new name had appeared. Not in his handwriting. Mr. Keegan, April 17th, 12:02 a.m., death by dehydration. Blood solid. He ran to Keegan's room. Knocked. No answer. He forced the door. Keegan was in bed, eyes open, mouth wide, tongue black. The cup of water on his nightstand was frozen solid. On the inside, Jonah dropped the journal. It pulsed, like a living thing. He tried to tear it. The pages screamed, not with sound, but with heat. His palms blistered, so he locked it in a kitchen drawer and tried to leave the building. But the front door no longer opened. The glass shimmered like liquid, but it held like steel. He screamed, and from somewhere upstairs, a voice whispered, "You re-entered. Now you continue." That night, Jonah didn't sleep. He wrote. He didn't want to, but his hand moved anyway. Name after name. Sometimes ones he recognized, sometimes ones he didn't, sometimes his own. Each time, the journal fed itself. He couldn't stop it, so he wrote less, slower, hoping to buy time. Then he got smart. He wrote his own name over and over. Jonah Craig, April 18th, 3:13 a.m., survived. Jonah Craig, April 19th, 3:13 a.m., survived. Jonah Craig, April 20th, 3:13 a.m., survived. But the journal rejected him. The ink bled backward. The name twisted into something unreadable. Then another name appeared below it. Alex Brunner, April 18th, 3:13 a.m., window fall. Jonah didn't know who Alex was until he saw the ambulance lights through the lobby window that morning. Alex was a delivery guy. He'd come every day for months. No one had ever seen him go above the ground floor. But now he had. And now he was gone. That night, Jonah dreamed. In the dream, he stood in apartment 14B. Except it wasn't the apartment anymore. It was a library. Shelves stretched in every direction, each filled with journals, thousands of them, each one humming, writing, sighing. In the center sat a desk. Behind it, a corpse with no eyes, Edgar Henley, still wearing his brown suit. Still writing, though his fingers were gone. Jonah approached. The corpse looked up and whispered, "This is your final volume." Jonah woke with blood on his fingertips and a fresh page in the journal. Jonah Craig, April 21st, 3:13 a.m., consumed by record. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but he had 2 days. 2 days to find out how to stop it. Or he'd be the next body in 14B. And someone else would open volume XX. Jonah didn't sleep again that night. He couldn't afford to. Every breath felt heavier. His chest ached with an unfamiliar pressure. Each pulse of his heart seemed out of rhythm, not quite his own. But he had to focus. He had to survive. The journal now lay open on his table, the ink swirling beneath his fingers like a twisted, living thing. Each name it wrote didn't just mark death. It marked inevitability. Every name, every time. The new names kept appearing. They were his neighbors, and some he didn't recognize. People he hadn't seen in weeks. Some were supposed to have already died, yet their names still reappeared on the pages, fresh as if they'd been written for the first time. The pattern was unmistakable. Each name came with its time, and each person, no matter their story, was destined to die. Jonah stared at the journal, feeling his stomach churn. What if he couldn't stop it? What if he was doomed to continue this cycle for the rest of his life? Suddenly, a thought cut through the haze of his panic. The apartment, the source of all this. Apartment 14B. If the journal was linked to the building, Then it wasn't just the pages he needed to escape, it was the apartment itself. A sudden, cold rush of realization swept over Jonah. The journal's power wasn't tied to the people, it was tied to the place. Jonah grabbed the journal and stood up. His knees felt weak, but he pushed through the fatigue, his mind racing. The building wasn't just an apartment complex, it was a vessel, a place that had absorbed the suffering of its tenants for decades, a building whose history was soaked in death and despair. The whispers he had heard on the night Keegan died, Jonah shuddered. They hadn't been from the apartment. They had come from the building itself, from the very walls that had seen years of tragedy. The curse didn't just haunt one floor. It spread across the whole building, infecting everyone who walked through the door. But how had it all started? He needed answers, and for that, he needed to go to 14B. Jonah forced himself out of his apartment, the journal clenched tightly in his hands. He had to know what was happening, what had happened before. The hallway was silent as he walked toward the stairwell. The lights flickered weakly overhead, casting long shadows on the peeling walls. The building had never felt this oppressive before. It felt alive, alive in a way that wasn't natural. He reached the stairwell, and the air grew colder. His breath fogged as he climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The building groaned in response. When he reached the second floor, Jonah hesitated. His mind raced, his pulse hammering in his chest. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and panicked. Then, the door at the end of the hall caught his eye. It was the door to apartment 14B. For a moment, he stood frozen. The door looked unchanged. It had been shut for so long, and yet it had the same unnatural aura. It was waiting for him. Jonah's hand shook as he reached for the door handle. The metal was cold under his fingers. It didn't resist. It didn't creak. It simply gave way. He stepped inside. The apartment looked exactly the same as it had in the photograph Keegan had shown him. The same furniture, the same decor, all stuck in time, as if frozen in 1986. Everything in its place, but the air was thick with something else, the weight of all the lost lives. Jonah felt his stomach lurch. His hands grew clammy. He scanned the room, looking for anything that might explain the nightmare that had consumed him. The journal was still clutched in his fingers. It seemed to hum, as if reacting to the presence of the apartment. There were no signs of life here. Nothing moved, nothing changed. But then he heard it, a whisper, faint like a voice from the past. Jonah froze. It was coming from the corner of the room. He looked over, his heart racing, but saw only shadows. Then he noticed something, a small object on the floor, half hidden beneath the old rug. He knelt down to pick it up. It was a key, a small old-fashioned key with intricate designs carved into the metal. It didn't look like anything that belonged to the apartment. It wasn't the key to the door. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. It was the key to a locked room, a room hidden within the apartment. His pulse quickened. There was no mention of a locked room in the files he'd read, and he had never seen anything in the apartment that could be locked. But this key, it didn't belong here. It didn't belong in the apartment at all. Jonah stood up, his legs trembling. He walked toward the farthest wall, where the wallpaper seemed slightly out of place. There was a seam in the wallpaper, just above the baseboard, that led to a narrow door. The key fit perfectly. With a soft click, the door opened. Jonah stepped into the room beyond. It was dark. The air was thick with dust, the smell of mildew, and something else, something metallic like iron. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A desk covered in old paper, photos, files, and an array of journals. The journals, just like the one in his hand. They were stacked high, spilling over the edges of the desk. Jonah approached the desk cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. The walls were lined with more photographs, images of tenants long gone, faces he recognized from the names in the journal, the people who had died. But there was one thing that stood out. In the center of the desk, there was a single photograph, the oldest of them all, a black and white image of 6 people. They were sitting at a table, but one of them was not human. The figure in the photograph was distorted, its face obscured, a shadowy presence that seemed to shift every time Jonah blinked. The caption read, "The Architects of the Curse." Jonah's heart stopped. He reached for the photo, his fingers trembling. As soon as he touched it, the image began to change. The figure in the photograph grew clearer, and for a split second, Jonah swore it looked like, no, it couldn't be. The figure was him. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. He pulled back, his mind racing. Was he part of this? The journal, the photo, the locked room. His mind couldn't process it. The connections were there, but they made no sense. The room began to spin, and Jonah staggered backward, knocking over a stack of papers. The pages fluttered to the floor, revealing more names, more deaths, more dates. Jonah Craig, Ross Talbot, Edgar Henley, and every other name that had appeared in the journal. He was part of it all. The curse had chosen him. Jonah stumbled toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The key, the one he'd picked up, clattered to the ground. The walls seemed to pulse with life, the air thick with the cries of those who had died. Jonah fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he reached the journal, but it was too late. The names had already started to change again, and Jonah knew, deep down, that he would never leave this building alive. Jonah sat on the floor of the dark room, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the curse that clung to the walls of apartment 14B. His chest was tight, as if the building itself were squeezing the breath from his lungs. The key lay forgotten on the floor beside him, its cold metal reflecting the faint light from the dusty window. His hands were trembling, the journal now clutched tightly in his fingers. The names were still changing, flowing across the pages like a living thing, never stopping, never resting. Every time Jonah tried to focus on one name, another replaced it faster than his mind could process. He was part of it. The curse had chosen him. The building, the tenants, the journal. It had all led to this moment. Jonah could feel the pull now, stronger than ever. The whispers of the past had begun to fill the air around him, each voice growing louder, more desperate, more insistent. He wasn't just a victim of this place. He was part of it. He had to understand it. He had to break it. Jonah stood shakily, the journal still in his grasp. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind burned with questions. How had it all started? Why had the tenants died? And why had he, of all people, been chosen? The photograph on the desk, the one that had shown the distorted figure, kept coming back to him. The figure had looked like him, hadn't it? No, it couldn't be. He was imagining things, but deep down, Jonah knew the truth. The figure was him. The curse had been set long ago. The deaths, the disappearances. It was all part of something far older than he had ever realized. This building wasn't just haunted. It was cursed, woven into the fabric of the place itself. And the curse had been waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. Jonah's breath caught as a realization struck him. The curse wasn't about the tenants. It was about the place, the apartment itself. The room around him began to pulse, the walls closing in on him as the darkness grew thicker. The air was no longer cold. It was suffocating. Jonah could hear the distant sound of footsteps, and then the whispers returned, louder than before, echoing off the walls. The voices were everywhere now. Everywhere. Leave this place. Jonah froze. The voice was clear, commanding, almost pleading. Get out before it's too late. The journal in his hand started to glow faintly, the ink shimmering as if it were alive. Jonah felt it. The pull. It was calling to him, guiding him, urging him to follow. He looked down at the pages. The names were now written in a new, urgent way. There was something different, something more terrifying. The journal was no longer just a record. It was a map of the building, of its rooms, its hallways, its hidden places. And at the center of it all was apartment 14B. Jonah's heart raced. The map was showing him something important. The room around him seemed to blur, and then everything snapped into focus. The apartment was shifting, changing. The floor beneath him was no longer solid. It had become soft, like the earth was giving way beneath him. Before he could react, the ground cracked open and Jonah fell. He fell into the abyss, down through the building, down through the layers of the curse. He screamed as the darkness enveloped him. Jonah didn't know how long he was falling. Time didn't exist here. The descent felt endless, as if he were being pulled into the very heart of the building. The whispers had stopped, but their absence left a hollow, oppressive silence. Finally, his fall slowed, and he landed with a heavy thud. Jonah gasped, his head spinning, his body aching from the impact. He opened his eyes to find himself in an unfamiliar place, a room that didn't belong. It was dark, but not the same darkness that had consumed the apartment. This was different. This was ancient. This room felt older than the building itself, as if it had been waiting here for centuries. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Jonah rose to his feet, his legs unsteady, but his instincts driving him forward. He had to understand. He had to find the answers. A soft glow emerged from the far corner of the room, illuminating a stone altar. The altar was covered in dust, but there was something on it, a large, weathered book. Jonah approached it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the ink was still legible. Jonah began to read, his eyes widening with each word. The curse of 14 began with the blood of the innocent. It was written into the walls, into the very foundation of this place. The architect who built this structure knew what it would become. He knew that it would feed on those who entered it, turning them into vessels for the curse. The building would become a prison, and its prisoners would die in the same way they had lived, trapped in their own fate. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. The book was describing the curse. It was real. The building had been built with the sole purpose of becoming a trap, a vessel for the dead, for the damned. And now, Jonah realized the true horror of it all. The tenants hadn't been chosen randomly. They were sacrifices. Every single one of them had been drawn to the building for a reason. And now it was his turn. He was the next sacrifice. Jonah dropped the book, his hands shaking. He backed away from the altar, panic rising in his chest. The room seemed to pulse with the force of the curse, the walls closing in on him. He had to get out. He had to escape. But it was too late. The walls seemed to melt away. Before Jonah could react, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A tall, imposing figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The figure reached out toward him, and Jonah knew he had seen this figure before. It was the same one from a photograph, the one he had seen in the apartment. The figure that had been part of the curse all along. The figure reached for him, and Jonah screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Jonah woke up in his apartment. The walls were silent. The room was still. The journal sat on his table, as if nothing had happened. He stood slowly, his body trembling, as his mind tried to piece together the fragments of the nightmare he had just experienced. But the truth was clear. He hadn't been dreaming. The curse had him. It had been waiting for him. And now, it would never let him go. Story 3, The Babysitter Murders. The house on Hawthorne Drive sat at the end of the block, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dried leaves and something off. The town of Rosewood had always been quiet, suburban, where everyone knew your name, where secrets were kept behind picket fences, and where the worst thing that could happen was a broken lawnmower or a lost pet. But tonight, the stillness fell heavy. Inside the house, Sarah sat in the dim light of the living room, the glow of the TV flickering over her. She was only 17, but she'd been babysitting for the Bakers for nearly a year now, ever since the twins had turned 4. The kids were easy, quiet, polite. But there was something about this night that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the storm clouds gathering in the sky, blocking out the moon, or maybe it was just the uneasy silence that had settled over the house. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but as she glanced toward the window, she could have sworn she saw movement in the shadows. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up and saw the text. You watch them. Now someone's watching you. Her heart skipped a beat. The message was simple, cryptic, but it sent a chill down her spine. She looked around the room again, half expecting someone to leap out from behind the curtains. But there was nothing, just the wind howling outside and the soft of the television. Maybe it was a prank, one of her friends, trying to get a rise out of her. They knew she was babysitting tonight, so it wouldn't be the first time they tried to mess with her. She laughed nervously, but the unease didn't fade. She grabbed her coat and headed toward the door to let the dog out in the backyard, thinking some fresh air would clear her head. But the moment she stepped outside, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The backyard was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the flickering porch light. Sarah squinted, her eyes darting around the yard. There was no movement, no sound, except for the wind. As she bent down to call the dog, something caught her eye, a figure, standing by the fence, just at the edge of the shadows. Sarah froze. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her presence. Her heart hammered in her chest as she hurriedly called for the dog, her voice tight with fear. The dog came bounding toward her, but the figure remained, still as a statue. Was it a neighbor? Or... The thought froze in her mind. No one lived on this side of the street. The house across the way had been abandoned for years. But this figure, it looked like someone was standing just beyond the yard, watching her. She didn't wait to find out. Grabbing the dog by the collar, she rushed back inside, locking the door behind her. Her hands were shaking as she held the dog close, the hairs on her arms prickling with the cold and that gnawing sense of being watched. Her phone buzzed again. You watch them. Now someone's watching you. Her throat tightened. Who was doing this? And why? Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Sarah jumped, the sound so sharp and sudden. It made her stomach drop. She hadn't heard anyone approach. There was no car in the driveway, no footsteps outside. She cautiously peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. Her heart was pounding in her chest. The message, what did it mean? She had no idea, but the dread was growing inside her, swirling like a storm ready to break. Slowly, she stepped back from the door. The phone buzzed again. Don't open the door. Her eyes widened. Whoever was sending these messages was inside her head, watching her. She turned to the kitchen, her mind racing, trying to think of something, anything to do. Then the phone rang. She froze. The ringtone was a haunting melody, one she had set months ago for unknown callers. Her eyes darted to the screen, and the caller ID read, "Unknown number." She hesitated. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. She had to answer it. Taking a deep breath, she swiped to answer. "Hello." A voice, deep and muffled, crackled through the line. "Sarah, do you remember what happened?" Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something about it, something unsettling. It felt like a memory she couldn't quite place, a nightmare half remembered. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling, trying to sound braver than she felt. The voice on the other end laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "You watch them," it said, its tone slow and deliberate. "Now someone's watching you, just like you watched them." The line went dead. Sarah stood in the middle of the living room. The phone still pressed her ear. Her mind was racing, but nothing made sense. Who was this? Why were they tormenting her? Her gaze landed on the kids' playroom door, still open, just like it had been when she'd stepped out earlier. She hadn't heard a peep from the twins in what felt like hours. That was strange. They were usually up, playing, always making noise. Unease clawed at her as she slowly walked toward the door, her footsteps quiet, the house feeling too still, too silent. She pushed the door open. The twins were sitting on the floor, facing the corner. Their backs were to her, and they were completely still. "Guys!" Sarah called, her voice unsure. They didn't respond. She stepped inside, a sense of dread creeping over her as she approached them. She knelt down behind them and touched their shoulders. They didn't flinch. No reaction. "Hey, what's wrong?" Sarah asked again, her voice a little louder now, but her hands trembling as she gently shook one of the twins. The child's head jerked up suddenly, and the lifeless eyes of the little girl met hers. Then, without warning, the other twin spun around too, both faces eerily still, eyes glazed, unblinking. Sarah's heart raced. What was happening? The silence was deafening. Then, in a raspy whisper, the twins spoke in unison. "You watched us. Now someone's watching you." Her blood ran cold. Before Sarah could react, the lights flickered. The door slammed shut behind her, and in the dim light, she saw something moving in the shadows, a shape moving toward her, slow, deliberate, but unmistakably there. The house was no longer just a house. It was a trap. She wasn't alone. And whoever was watching her wasn't just a stranger. It was someone who had been there all along. The storm outside intensified as Sarah's mind raced, each passing second stretching into eternity. The air inside the house felt thick, suffocating. The silence was oppressive. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her heart was pounding like a drum, the beat echoing in her ears. The twins remained eerily still, their faces devoid of expression, eyes wide open, as if they were staring into something unseen. Sarah's hand trembled as she slowly pulled away from them, her body frozen in place. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. The house felt different now, distorted, as though the walls were closing in, the air thickening with each breath. She wasn't sure if it was a storm outside or the palpable dread settling in the room, but something was horribly wrong. Finally, her body screamed for movement. She jerked back, instinctively reaching for her phone in her pocket. She needed to call someone, anyone, but as she pulled out and unlocked the screen, her hands were shaking so violently that it was hard to read the notifications. One message stood out, though. "I see. You watched them." The message was from an unknown number, one that she had never seen before. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, her voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" Before she could press send, the phone buzzed with another incoming message. "It's too late. You're already part of it." The air in the room seemed to grow colder. Sarah could feel her breath catching in her throat, each inhale more labored than the last. She looked at the twins again. They hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. They were still facing the corner, their heads tilted unnaturally, as if listening to something far beyond her comprehension. "W's doing this," she whispered aloud, her voice hoarse. The twins spoke in unison once more, their voices flat, almost robotic. "The Watcher is coming." A sudden bang echoed through the house, loud and sharp, snapping Sarah out of her trance. Her head whipped toward the source of the sound, the front door. But as she reached the entryway, her hand froze just before it touched the doorknob. She hesitated, eyes darting around the dimly lit house. The atmosphere had shifted. The walls seemed to breathe, the air thick and heavy. She was no longer just a babysitter in a quiet home. She was trapped in a nightmare. The door was wide open, but there was no one outside, only the sound of the storm, the wind howling in the distance. Sarah didn't know what to do. She should run. She should leave. Get the twins to safety. Get out of this house before whatever was happening here consumed her. Yet a pull, a sense of dread, kept her frozen in place. Then, without warning, she heard a noise behind her. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, just on the other side of the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Before she could react, a figure stepped into the doorway. It was tall, imposing, silhouetted against the stormy night outside. The figure's face was obscured by the darkness, but the outline was unmistakable. The Watcher. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her body paralyzed with fear. She didn't know who this person was, what they wanted, or how they had gotten in, but she could feel the weight of their presence. It was suffocating, chilling. "Who are you?" Sarah finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a step forward, its eyes glinting in the dark like shards of ice. It didn't speak, didn't move. It just watched her, and that's when Sarah saw it. In the figure's hand was a knife. The gleam of it in the dim light made her stomach lurch. A scream rose in her throat, but she didn't give it voice. She bolted into the hallway, adrenaline surging through her as her mind screamed for her to run. The sound of the footsteps behind her quickened. They were gaining on her. The knife. The storm outside was deafening, but inside, there was only the sound of Sarah's frantic breathing and the heavy, persistent footsteps of her pursuer. She reached the twins' room, desperate. She slammed the door behind her, her hands fumbling for the lock. But it was too late. The figure was already there, looming in the hallway, its shape a dark silhouette in the flickering light. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had no escape. No one was coming. She was alone with the Watcher. The door creaked behind her, and as she spun around, she saw the twins standing in the doorway, their eyes still vacant, still wide, but now smiling. Their smiles were too wide, their teeth too sharp, and there was something else in their eyes, something dark, something not quite human. Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. And just like that, the room plunged into darkness. The darkness was suffocating, a thick, heavy veil that seemed to absorb every sound, every breath. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed in the silent room. She couldn't see the twins anymore, couldn't hear their footsteps. It was as if they had vanished into the shadows, leaving only the oppressive air and the cold emptiness behind. She stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall, the fear clawing at her insides. Her eyes darted around the room, trying to make out any movement, any sign of life. But there was nothing, just the sound of her own ragged breath and the distant roar of the storm outside. The twins had been standing right in front of her just moments ago. Their unnatural smiles still haunted her mind, twisting her thoughts into knots. What was happening to them? What was happening to her? Her phone was still in her hand, but it felt useless. The screen was cracked, the messages from the unknown number still haunting her with their cryptic, taunting words. She had to get out. She had to find a way to leave this nightmare before it consumed her completely. But the door was still open. The footsteps had stopped, but she could feel the presence, that dark force lurking just beyond her sight. It was waiting, patient, like a predator stalking its prey. A soft click sounded from the hallway. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A shadow passed in front of the doorway, its movement swift and deliberate. It wasn't just a storm outside now. The house itself seemed to groan, the walls whispering a language she couldn't understand. Then, a voice broke the silence. It was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it grew louder with each word. "You watch them," it said, the voice deep and menacing. "Now you'll watch yourself." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't the twins. It wasn't anyone she recognized. It was the Watcher, the same figure that had stood in the doorway, knife in hand. Sarah felt her body tremble, her legs nearly giving out from beneath her. She was trapped. There was nowhere to go. The words echoed in her mind, over and over, each repetition tightening the noose around her throat. "You watch them. Now you'll watch yourself." The voice wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was coming from behind her. Sarah spun around, heart leaping into her throat. There, standing in the center of the room, was the Watcher. But this time, there was something different about them. They weren't just a shadow in the dark. They were solid, real, their features slowly becoming clearer as the darkness seemed to recede around them. The figure's face was obscured by a mask, a smooth, featureless face that was both haunting and mesmerizing. There was no mouth, no eyes, just an empty, hollow surface that reflected nothing but the darkness itself. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It simply stood there, watching her, its presence suffocating. "Who are you?" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. The Watcher didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as though studying her, its posture unervingly calm. Then, the twins appeared again, standing in the doorway, their eyes now glowing faintly in the dark. Their smiles had grown even wider, more unsettling, like jagged, twisted caricatures of innocence. They stepped into the room, their small feet making no sound on the floor as they moved closer to Sarah. "You watch them," the twins said in unison, their voices cold and distant. "Now you'll watch the end." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Sarah's chest tightened, panic surging through her veins. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She was surrounded. The Watcher stepped forward, slowly, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding across the floor. Sarah tried to back away, but her legs were frozen in place, her body betraying her, unable to escape. Then, the figure reached up and removed its mask. Sarah's blood ran cold as the face beneath the mask was revealed. It was her face, her own face, twisted into a grotesque, lifeless expression. It was her, but not her. The eyes were hollow, empty, devoid of any humanity, and the skin was pale, stretched tight over the bones. The lips were curled into a twisted smile, the teeth sharp and unnaturally white. It was a reflection of herself, but distorted, broken. The Watcher reached out with cold, gloved hands and touched Sarah's face, its touch sending an icy chill through her skin. She recoiled instinctively, but the figure's grip tightened, holding her in place. "You watched them die," the Watcher whispered, its voice now chillingly familiar. "And now you'll die just like them." A loud, deafening crash filled the room as the door to the hallway slammed shut, trapping Sarah inside. The walls began to close in around her, the space shrinking with each passing second, as if the house itself was alive, closing in on her. The twins' voices were no longer in unison. They spoke individually now, their words twisted and distorted. "We've been waiting for you," one said, its voice a low, mocking whisper, waiting for the one who would watch. "We've always been here," the other added, its tone laced with malice. In the shadows, in the dark, Sarah's mind was reeling, spinning in a vortex of confusion and terror. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. The twins, the Watcher, the mask. It was all a nightmare, wasn't it? But the cold, clammy touch of the Watcher's hand on her face was real. The darkness closing in was real. And the words of the twins echoed in her ears, growing louder, more insistent. "You'll never escape. You'll never be free." And then, with a jolt, the room went completely still. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if time itself had stopped. In that moment, Sarah understood. She was no longer the babysitter. She was just another victim, caught in the web of something much older, much darker than she could have ever imagined. The Watcher was real, the twins were real, and the house was the prison. And as she stared into the hollow eyes of the Watcher, she knew she would never escape. The walls seemed to pulse, alive with the echoes of something dark and unyielding. Every breath Sarah took felt heavier than the last, as the air was thick with dread. The Watcher's grip on her face didn't loosen, and the twins stood motionless, their eyes never leaving her. The room shrank further, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet, a low, groaning sound like the house was about to collapse under the weight of its secrets. She tried to scream, to shout, to run, but her body wouldn't respond. Fear had rooted her to the spot, her legs like lead, her throat a tight knot that wouldn't let any sound escape. All she could do was stare into the featureless face of the Watcher, her reflection twisted into something horrific, something monstrous. "It's all over now," the Watcher whispered, its voice cold, emotionless. "You watch them. Now, you're the one who will be watched." The twins stepped closer, their small hands stretching out, their eyes glowing brighter. One of them giggled, the sound high-pitched and unnatural, like the laughter of a child who had forgotten how to play. The other's smile widened, sharp and jagged, a grin that seemed to stretch too wide for a human face. "We waited for you," the first twin said, its voice distant but clear. "We waited for the one who would never leave." "We never leave," the second twin echoed, the words hanging in the air like a curse. The Watcher's hand moved from Sarah's face to her shoulder, a cold, unnatural pressure that felt like it could crush bone. Her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, she thought she might faint from sheer terror. But she couldn't. She couldn't give in. She had to fight, had to break free, even if she didn't know how. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah yanked herself away from the Watcher, stumbling backward as she scrambled for the door. Her fingers brushed against the cold of the frame, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. No, more than locked. It was sealed. The house itself had closed its grip around her, and there was no escape. "You can't leave," the Watcher said softly, almost tenderly. "Not now. Not ever." The room was closing in on her, suffocating her. The walls seemed to be pressing in, and Sarah's mind raced, scrambling for something, anything, that could help her escape. But there was nothing. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, her eyes fell on the diary. It sat on the table, The same one the twins had written in, the one that predicted every death, every murder, down to the smallest detail. It was open now, the pages fluttering in the faint breeze that had begun to stir. Without thinking, without even knowing what she was doing, Sarah lunged for it. She grabbed the book, flipping through the pages with frantic hands. The writing was familiar, almost comforting, as though it had been waiting for her to see it. The last page, the final page, it was empty, except for one line, scrawled hastily at the bottom. "You're next." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had known, in some part of her mind, that she was never going to walk out of here alive. But to see it written down, to know that her death was already part of the plan, sent a chill through her soul. The twins were standing just behind her now, their cold breath on the back of her neck, their presence a dark, crushing weight. "It's time," one of them whispered. "No," Sarah cried, clutching the diary to her chest as if it could shield her from the fate that awaited her. "Please, no." But it was too late. The watcher moved again, its hollow eyes locked on Sarah as it stepped forward. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening, swallowing everything in their path. The house groaned again, a deep, resonant sound, like it was alive and awake, watching her struggle. "You've watched them," the watcher said. "Now you'll watch yourself." And with that, the twins lunged. They were faster than Sarah could comprehend, their movements too fluid, too unnatural to be human. Their hands grabbed her, pulling her toward the center of the room. The diary slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor, its pages fluttering like the wings of some lost, forgotten creature. The watcher reached forward, its hand closing around Sarah's throat in an iron grip. She gasped for breath, the pressure unbearable, her vision blurred, and her mind screamed in protest, but the darkness was already closing in. The cold, the fear, the weight of it all was too much. "You'll never leave," the watcher murmured as Sarah's world began to fade. "Not here, not in this house, not in this life." The darkness swallowed her whole, and the room was silent once again. Story 4, Missing Caller Number 9. T was the night the numbers ticked over. The 1 millionth listener had finally tuned into True Crime Chronicles, the most popular crime podcast on the air. A podcast that had slowly transformed from an underground obsession to a worldwide sensation. The show had captivated millions, dissecting the darkest, most twisted cases and giving them a voice they never had in courtrooms or police stations. Tonight was no different, except for one thing, the milestone. Congratulations, caller number 9. The voice of Derek Thomas, the podcast host, rang out through the airwaves, calm and assured, with just a hint of excitement behind it. "You are the 1 millionth listener of True Crime Chronicles, and we got a special prize just for you. What's your name, and where are you calling from?" The phone line crackled. A brief pause before the voice came through, shaky but elated. This is Rachel. "I can't believe I'm number 9. I'm calling from St. Louis." Derek's voice took on a warm, charming tone. "Well, Rachel, this is a big moment for you, and we've got something really special in store. I know you're a huge fan of the show. Tell us, what's your favorite episode?" Rachel laughed nervously. I think the one on the Vanishing Man case. I've listened to it 100 times. It's so creepy how he just disappeared without a trace." Derek chuckled, the sound smooth and disarming. "Ah, classic. And now, Rachel, you're a part of our story. You've made history. Congratulations again." As the call continued, the words were more of a blur. Rachel was ecstatic, gushing about her win, and Derek, the calm, charismatic host, continued to engage her in light conversation. The call seemed like any other. But when the clock struck midnight, something sinister happened. Rachel's voice cut off. The phone line went dead, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. "Rachel?" Derek's voice, still on air, had shifted slightly. He called out again. "Rachel, you still there?" Nothing. Derek glanced at the soundboard, his fingers dancing over the buttons, trying to reconnect the call, but the silence persisted. The call had ended abruptly, and the show was moving on. The podcast continued, the same as it always did, and the rest of the night's show flowed without incident. But behind the microphone, Derek's mind was already working, calculating, wondering. Rachel had vanished. Hours passed. The podcast ended, and the team went home, unaware of the small crack that had appeared in their polished operation. The next day, the team was given an alert that Rachel had gone missing. She had vanished from her apartment, and her phone showed the last call was the one she made to True Crime Chronicles. At first, it seemed like just another coincidence, but as the days went on, more winners from a podcast contest began to disappear. One by one, they were gone without a trace. The media buzzed with rumors, but no one could connect the dots. And as the podcast listener base skyrocketed, Derek and his team remained unfazed. To the millions, it was just another unsolved mystery, another twisted story to tune into, a case to follow. But to Derek, it was all part of the plan. In the dim-lit basement of his apartment building, Derek sat, staring at a wall of monitors. Each screen flickered with images, faces, usernames, and personal details of people who had once been listeners, obsessed listeners, those who had been drawn to his voice, who had followed every case, hung on every word. He clicked a button, and the feed switched to a live video stream. A young man, thin and nervous looking, was pacing around a small, dark room. The camera was shaky, his movements frantic. "W, what's going on?" he muttered, his voice shaky. "Why am I here? Why are you doing this?" Derek's fingers flew across the keyboard, and a loud buzz echoed from the speakers. "You're here because you're special." Derek's voice came through, smooth and calm as ever. "You've been chosen, just like the others." The man stopped pacing, his eyes widening as he looked around the room. No, this isn't real. This isn't happening." Derek leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the panic creeping into the man's voice. "You were a fan, weren't you? You knew True Crime Chronicles better than most. Now you're going to be part of it." The man began to shout, banging on the walls, but there was nowhere to escape. The camera continued to watch, and Derek didn't flinch. This was all part of the show. This was all part of the plan. Meanwhile, in the world above, the news outlets were starting to report on the disappearances. The authorities were investigating, but they had no leads, no answers. The pattern was too strange. Why were these people all connected? Why was it always after they'd been featured on the podcast? The truth was simple, and it was hidden behind the glossy, engaging narrative that True Crime Chronicles spun. Every contest, every giveaway, each one had been a carefully orchestrated method to draw on the most dedicated listeners. It wasn't about the prize, it was about the people. And Derek, the charismatic host, wasn't just a podcaster. He was a leader of a dark and twisted cult, one that had been using the show as a recruitment tool for years. His listeners, those who hung on every word, became his next victims. But this was no ordinary killing spree. Derek's winners weren't just disappearing. They were being hunted. The basement was silent, except for the hum of the monitors. Derek turned his attention to the next screen, where a countdown timer was ticking down. Another victim, another hunt. The next contest was about to begin. The world thought it was just entertainment. They had no idea that True Crime Chronicles wasn't just telling the stories. It was making them. And every episode was just another step closer to their ultimate prize. "Let the games begin," Derek murmured, his smile cold and predatory as he stared at the screen. The days following Rachel's disappearance blurred together. The podcast had continued as usual, attracting millions of listeners, each eager to hear the latest chilling tale from Derek's ever-growing collection of crime stories. But for those who knew what had really happened, those close to Rachel, the disappearances had started to feel more than just a coincidence. It felt like a pattern, and they were the only ones who saw it. Sarah Mackenzie was one of those people, a longtime listener of True Crime Chronicles. She had been a fan of the show for years, mesmerized by Derek's voice, his ability to take the most unsolvable cases and dissect them like a professional. His insight into each case made it feel personal, almost as if he had been there. The way he spoke about the victims, it was as though he understood them, their final moments, their fear. But when Rachel disappeared, Sarah had felt a cold shiver down her spine. It wasn't the first time something strange had happened after one of Derek's contests. No, it had been happening for months, if not longer. She'd seen the rumors circulating on online forums about winners who'd never been heard from again, about strange coincidences tied to each one. But it was too late to do anything. Rachel had already become a part of the mystery, just another name added to the list of the missing. That night, Sarah decided she had to do something. She couldn't just sit idly by, listening to the podcast, pretending nothing had happened. Rachel had been her friend, her fellow listener. She couldn't let the story end without finding out what had really happened. Sarah sat in her small apartment, the dim light from her desk lamp casting long shadows against the walls. The only sound was the hum of her computer as she scrolled through the online forums dedicated to true crime chronicles. She had been reading for hours, piecing together information, cross-referencing every winner, every disappearance. The patterns were undeniable. Every time Derek had a contest, every time a new listener won, they would vanish. Each winner was associated with a unique story and new mystery, but no one ever came back. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing. She knew she was getting close to something bigger than just a crime spree. There was a connection between the missing people, a connection to Derek's voice, to the show that had captivated millions. But Sarah needed proof. She needed to know that Derek Thomas was more than just a podcaster. She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair, trying to clear her mind. Her eyes fell on the podcast's most recent episode, which had just been released. The title, The Case of the Vanishing Victim. It was a chilling topic, one that resonated with her now more than ever. But Sarah didn't want to hear Derek's voice right now. She didn't want to get lost in his stories. She needed to know the truth. With a deep breath, Sarah closed her eyes, making a decision. She would call in. She would become part of the next contest. She needed to know what Derek knew, why these people kept vanishing, and most importantly, why no one ever seemed to question it. The phone rang, the line crackling as Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. It had taken her all day to gather the courage, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might find. A voice answered, smooth and professional. Welcome to True Crime Chronicle. You're on the air with Derek Thomas. What's your name and where are you calling from? Sarah, she answered, trying to steady her voice. I'm calling from Denver. Ah, Denver, a beautiful city. Tell me, Sarah, what got you interested in true crime? What's your favorite case? Derek's voice was as smooth as ever, his words warm and inviting. For a moment, Sarah hesitated, but only for a second. She had a plan. She had to stay calm, to play along. It's the cases that don't make sense, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but she forced it to sound steady. The ones where people just disappear, like Rachel, like the others. I've been listening for a while, and something's just not right. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, a flicker of something Sarah couldn't quite place. Then Derek's voice came back, smooth but with a new edge to it. I see you've been paying close attention, Sarah. It's good to be a critical listener. Now, let's see if you can follow along with tonight's contest. The sudden shift in tone sent a chill through her, but Sarah refused to back down. This was it. She was too deep now. The contest began. Questions flowed, each one more difficult than the last. But Sarah was sharp. She knew the answers, the cases, the names, the places. They were all etched into her memory, stored away from years of listening to the show. But with each question, she began to feel something different, something unsettling. Derek's questions weren't just about knowledge. They were probing, like he was trying to pull something out of her, something deeper. All right, Sarah, Derek said, his voice now laced with something darker. You've made it to the final question. Answer this, and you'll be our lucky winner. Tell me, what makes you a true crime fan? What draws you in, makes you keep coming back? Sarah's mind raced. She had to be careful. Too much honesty, and she might reveal her plan. Too little, and Derek might sense something was off. She took a deep breath and answered. It's the mystery, the way people disappear, the feeling that they're still out there, somewhere, just waiting to be found. Derek's voice softened, as though impressed. Well, Sarah, congratulations. You've won the contest. Her heart skipped a beat. She had won. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Your prize will be delivered soon, Derek continued. But be warned, what you'll find isn't what you expect. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a strange sense of dread creep over her. Something wasn't right. The words Derek had said, the way his tone had shifted, was like he'd been testing her. It wasn't just a contest. It was something more. And she was just beginning to understand the price of winning. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly beside her bed. Her mind was still foggy, the events of the night before feeling surreal, almost like a dream. She rubbed her eyes and grabbed the phone, her heart skipping when she saw the notification. It was from an unknown number. Your prize is ready for pickup. Details inside. She stared at the message, an overwhelming sense of unease flooding her. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had known something like this would happen. The contest was never just about a prize. It had always been more. But now that it was here, in her hands, it felt more real, and real was dangerous. Without thinking, she opened the message. A single address was given. No name, no further instruction. Just an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The moment she read it, a chill settled in her bones. Her instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to turn back. But something deeper, something more terrifying, pushed her forward. She had to know the truth. She had to see this through. Whatever it was, whoever was behind it, she was going to expose them. By the time Sarah arrived at the address, the sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over the empty streets. The warehouse was exactly what she expected. Old, industrial, abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the metal door rusted and faded from years of neglect. But she knew this was the place. There was no mistaking it. As she stepped out of her car, her shoes clicked against the pavement, the only sound in the silent night. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the whole world was holding its breath. She hesitated for a moment, standing in front of the door, but then her hand reached out, trembling, and she knocked. 3 short raps. Nothing. She knocked again, a little louder this time, and waited. The silence stretched on, longer than it should have. And just as she was about to turn and leave, the door creaked open, slowly, like it had been waiting for her. A man stood on the other side. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that blended with the shadows. His face was obscured by the brim of a hat, but Sarah could feel his gaze, cold and calculating, on her. There was something unnerving about him, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "You're Sarah, I assume," the man said, his voice low and smooth, just like Derek's. But there was an edge to it, something that didn't sit right. I won a contest," Sarah said, her voice shaky despite herself. "The True Crime Chronicles contest." The man nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Come inside," he said, gesturing to the dimly lit interior. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. She had come this far, hadn't she? She couldn't back out now. She stepped into the warehouse. Inside was nothing like she had expected. There were no piles of merchandise, no stacks of prizes. Instead, the room was lined with monitors, each one flickering with static before focusing on different scenes. Empty streets, alleyways, darkened rooms, all eerily familiar. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her heart thumping wildly. The man closed the door behind her, the sound of it echoing in the empty space. "Welcome to the real contest," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "This is where the game begins." Before Sarah could respond, one of the monitors flickered to life. It was a live feed of Derek's podcast studio, the familiar setup of microphones and sound equipment filling the screen. But something was off. The studio was empty, save for Derek, who sat at his desk, staring directly at the camera. "Sarah, I see you've made it." Derek's voice crackled through the speakers, his tone just as smooth and inviting as ever. But there was a darkness in it now, a hint of something that made Sarah's stomach turn. She took a step back. "What is this? Why am I here?" The man beside her chuckled darkly. You're part of the game now. You're here because you're the next one, the next target, but you're also the next piece to this puzzle. You see, Derek isn't just a podcaster. He's the architect of something much larger, something far darker. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? What's happening here? The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. Derek's show isn't just about telling stories. It's about control. Every listener, every contestant, is chosen for a reason. We've been watching you, Sarah, watching all of you. You're part of something much bigger than a simple contest. And now you're in it. You'll be the next to disappear. But not before we have our fun. Sarah's pulse quickened, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, the air thick with the weight of something ancient and malevolent. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. This wasn't just a game. This wasn't just about winning a prize. She had walked into a trap. Before she could react, the man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist tightly. It's too late now, Sarah. There's no turning back. You'll play your part just like the others. The monitors around her flickered again, and this time, it was a live feed of the contest show. Derek's voice echoed in the room, louder now, almost mocking. Well done, Sarah. You've made it, but there's always a price to pay for winning. Remember, you're not just playing for yourself anymore. The man's grip tightened, his fingers digging into her skin. Panic surged through Sarah, but she refused to show weakness. She couldn't let him see her fear. She had to escape. With a sudden burst of strength, she wrenched her wrist free and backed away, her eyes darting around the warehouse for an exit. But the monitors were everywhere, watching her every move, each screen displaying the same unblinking gaze. Running won't help you, Sarah, the man said, his voice dripping with malice. You'll be hunted soon enough. But first, Derek has a message for you. And with that, the monitors flickered again, showing Derek's smiling face. Don't worry, Sarah. You're about to be part of the greatest show ever. Sarah's heart raced as she stared at the screens, her pulse pounding in her ears. The last thing she had expected was to find herself in this nightmarish place, locked inside a warehouse with no way out, surrounded by eerie live feeds. She was part of something much darker than she could have imagined, and the realization sent waves of dread crashing over her. The man who had greeted her earlier stepped back, allowing Sarah a brief moment to gather her thoughts. He seemed to revel in her fear, his cold, calculating eyes never leaving her as the images on the monitors continued to shift. Derek's face filled the screen once more. Don't worry, Sarah. This is just the beginning. You made it farther than most. The others. Derek paused, his smile widening as though savoring the moment. The others didn't get the chance to enjoy the view. A chill ran down her spine, and Sarah felt her throat constrict. The voice that had once felt like an easy companion, the voice that had soothed her with true crime stories and conspiracies, now sent a wave of terror through her. Derek wasn't the friendly podcast host she thought he was. He was something far more sinister. She turned her head to the man beside her. What are you going to do to me? Her voice trembled despite her attempts to remain composed. The man stepped closer, a dark glint in his eye. It's not what we're going to do to you, Sarah. It's what you're going to do to yourself. You'll play your part, just like all the others. And when it's over, you'll be a part of the show too. His words hit Sarah like a blow. She didn't understand. What part was he talking about? What was he expecting from her? The man nodded toward the monitors. The feed of Derek's face flickered again, this time with a new message. Derek's voice had an unsettling cheerfulness to it. Sarah, the game is far from over. You're the lucky one. The prize? Oh, it's not just for you. It's for us all. We're all watching, waiting to see how far you'll go. Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered. The man's gaze flickered too, as though he was waiting for something Sarah couldn't see. And then it clicked. The moment of realization hit her, like a thunderclap. She wasn't here just because she had won the contest. She wasn't here just because Derek had wanted her to be. She was part of a twisted game, part of a sick, organized event that had been going on far longer than she realized. She was a pawn, being controlled, just like all the other winners before her. What is this? She whispered, barely able to breathe. Her throat felt tight, constricted. Who are you people? The man didn't respond at first. He stood still, his eyes glued to the screen. Derek's voice crackled over the speakers, cutting through the tension. You're part of it now, Sarah. You'll understand soon enough. You'll play your part. There's no escaping this game. You're the next contestant, the next piece of the puzzle. And when you disappear, just like the others, we'll keep going. We always keep going. Sarah's stomach turned. She backed away from man, her mind spinning, the walls closing in around her. Every exit was blocked, every screen showing her every move. Her chest tightened with panic, but she knew she had to act. If she didn't, she'd become just another missing person, another statistic. She turned toward the nearest monitor, her fingers trembling as she searched the buttons along the panel. But before she could reach it, the warehouse door slammed open with a deafening crash. A flood of panic shot through Sarah as a group of men, dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks, rushed into the room. They moved quickly, purposefully, encircling her before she could even react. "Get her," the man whispered, his voice suddenly cold and commanding. "We don't have much time." The masked men lunged, grabbing her arms, their hands cold and unyielding. Sarah fought back with everything she had, kicking and thrashing, but there were too many of them, their grip like iron. One of them reached for her phone, which had been lying forgotten in her pocket. With one swift motion, he pulled it free and held it up to her face. The phone screen lit up, flashing with a new notification. "Congratulations, Sarah. You're next." The word sent a jolt of cold fear through her. Her mind raced. What was happening? Was she going to be next? Was she going to disappear? Just like the others? The man stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes locked on her. "This is where the real game begins, Sarah. The audience is waiting, and so are we." The masked men dragged her toward the center of the warehouse, the lights above flickering and buzzing as they did. A low hum filled the air, as if something was coming to life, something dark and terrifying that Sarah could never have imagined. Then the screens changed again. This time, the feed was live. Derek's voice boomed from the speakers. "Get ready, Sarah. The show is about to start." A twisted grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that made Sarah's stomach churn. "We all play our part. And now it's your turn." Story 5. The 333 Files. The air in the old evidence room was thick with dust, and a faint smell of mildew clung to the faded boxes stacked on the shelves. Detective John Harper had spent most of his career in this building. Years of digging through evidence, solving cases, uncovering truths buried deep in the shadows. But this was different. He was no longer a detective. He was retired, his badge a relic of a past that felt both distant and close at the same time. His fingers ran over familiar boxes, his eyes scanning the faded labels on the spines. He knew this place like the back of his hand, but something about this room felt heavier today, like a secret was about to be unearthed. It was then that his eyes landed on the dusty box at the back of the top shelf. It was different from the others. The label was barely legible, faded by years of neglect, but there was 333 Files. Harper's heart skipped a beat as he reached for it, his fingers brushing the fragile cardboard. He had never seen it before, and yet something about the box seemed familiar. He didn't know why, but his gut told him it was important, very important. He pulled the box down with quiet creak and set it on the nearby desk. The box was heavier than it should have been, as if it contained something more than just paperwork. Slowly, Harper opened the flaps, revealing a series of manila files, each one carefully labeled with the name of the victim, along with a case number and a date. Each one marked with the same eerie timestamp, 3:33 a.m. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he flipped through the files. Each one was a murder case, a cold, unsolved mystery that had been buried deep in the archives. But there was something unsettling about the time of death being so precise. 3:33 a.m., the same time. Over and over again, Harper leaned in closer, reading the details of the first case. A young woman had been found dead in her apartment. The cause of death ruled as blunt force trauma. The file indicated that there had been no signs of forced entry and no witnesses. The time of death, 3:33 a.m. Harper had never seen this case before. He knew the name, but the details were foreign to him. He moved on to the next file. Another victim, another brutal murder, and again, the same timestamp, 3:33 a.m. Harper's mind raced. This wasn't a coincidence. Something about these cases felt connected. He couldn't explain it, but he knew they were all linked by something darker than he could fathom. The more he read, the more his stomach churned. The murders had occurred over the span of 2 decades, with no clear connection between the victims. But the time of death, 3:33 a.m., was always the same. It was then that Harper found something that made his blood run cold. A folder labeled case #A001, his own first case, the murder that had haunted him for years. The case he'd never been able to solve. But as he read through the file, the details seemed wrong, distorted. His stomach twisted with a sense of unease as he read the victim's name, Caroline McDonald, the woman he had never been able to forget. He didn't need to read anymore. The name was enough. He remembered the case vividly. Caroline had been found dead in her apartment, her throat slashed, the room covered in blood. No witnesses, no suspects, but the time of death was listed as 3:33 a.m. Harper leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. He had been a homicide detective for over 30 years. He had solved countless cases, brought justice to victims, and uncovered the darkest corners of the human psyche. But this was something else, something that went beyond the realm of his understanding. His hands trembled as he picked up the next file. Another victim, another murder. The time of death, 3:33 a.m. But there was something different about this case. The victim had been a man named David Johnson, a man Harper had known from his past, a man he had met years ago, before he had retired. The file was brief, but it made Harper's stomach churn even more. David Johnson had been found dead in his own home, an apparent suicide. But Harper knew something wasn't right. He had seen David the day before. The man had been perfectly fine. So why had he ended up dead in his own home? And why had his time of death been listed as 3:33 a.m.? Harper could feel a chill creeping over him. These weren't just murders. They were something far more sinister, something that had been hidden from the public eye for years. And somehow, he had been connected to all of them. The final file in the box was the one that froze him in place. Case #A002. His own name was on the label. The file was thin, containing only a single piece of paper. As Harper unfolded it, his eyes scanned the brief notes. It was a report from his own time as a detective. The case was listed as closed, marked with the words unsolved. The chilling part came next. The report was signed by a man named Samuel Harper, Harper's own name. But it wasn't possible. He had never worked on this case. He didn't even remember the detail. Yet, the report was there, signed by him, with the same timestamp, 3:33 a.m. Suddenly, everything around him felt off kilter, as if the very room had tilted to the side. Harper's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the files, but the truth was starting to slip through his fingers. He couldn't understand it. How had he missed this? Why had he never seen these files before? The more he looked, the more the pieces began to fall into place, though they didn't make sense. Not yet. There was something about 3:33 a.m., something he was connected to, something that was buried deep within his own memories. The files were hiding something, and Harper knew it. The truth was in there, somewhere, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to find it. The thought gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into the mystery. He closed the box with shaking hands, the weight of it all settling heavily on his chest. There was more to this than he could possibly understand. He had to know the truth. He had to find out what these files meant, even if it meant facing a part of himself that he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. Harper sat alone in the dark, the dim glow from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls of his small office. The box of files sat in front of him, now closed and heavy with the weight of secrets. He had spent hours combing through the documents, but the more he read, the less he understood. There were connections between the victims, connections he couldn't yet see. All of them died at 3:33 a.m. All of them had been victims of brutal murders, and somehow Harper himself was linked to them. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, its rhythmic sound almost mocking in the stillness. Harper felt the walls of the room closing in on him. The air was thick with the smell of dust and the weight of unanswered questions. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. But there was one thing that was certain. The 333 files were not just a record of cold cases. They were a trail that led to him. The first few cases were difficult to make sense of, as they were detached, disjointed in the way they were presented. But the more Harper dug, the more pieces began to click into place. The victims were chosen at random, seemingly, but they all had something in common: a dark history, a past that was hidden from the public eye. And then there was a file labeled case #A001, the first murder that had haunted him for decades. Caroline McDonald. He hadn't thought about her in years, but her name was burned into his memory. Her face, too. Caroline had been young, full of life, and yet she had been taken away in the most brutal way. No witnesses, no evidence, just a bloody crime scene, and the eerie timestamp of 3:33 a.m. Harper had worked the case with everything he had, but in the end, it had been left unsolved. The files in front of him suggested that there was more to Caroline's death than he had ever known. There was a connection, a thread that ran through the entire collection of cases, and now it was pulling at him. As he leaned back in his chair, the silence of the room pressing on him, Harper's thoughts drifted to something unsettling. What if the killer hadn't been a stranger? What if the killer had been someone closer to him than he could imagine? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow involved, that he had missed something crucial in his investigation. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him, until he felt like he was on the edge of something far darker than he had ever anticipated. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He had to go back to the beginning. Harper stood up, his legs feeling heavy as if they were made of stone. His hand shook as he grabbed the box and made his way out of the office, determined to find answers. The sun had long set by the time Harper arrived at the old police station, the building that had once been his second home. It now stood as a hollow monument to a career he had left behind. The streets outside were quiet, and the distant hum of the city felt muted, as if the world was holding its breath. Inside, the building felt eerily empty, and the lights flickered overhead as Harper walked down the long, familiar hallway. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each one growing louder in the stillness of night. He paused in front of the evidence room door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been in this room late at night before. It felt different now. The room held memories of every case he had worked on, every piece of evidence he had collected. But tonight, the air felt thick with something else, a sense of dread. Something was waiting for him in there. He keyed in the code, the soft click of the lock breaking the silence. As he stepped inside, he was met with a familiar scent of dust and old files. The room was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. He moved toward the filing cabinets where the old case files were kept, each one a relic of a long-forgotten investigation. Harper's eyes scanned the labels on the cabinets. He knew this room better than anyone, but tonight it felt different. He felt like an intruder, as though he didn't belong in this space anymore. Yet, he couldn't stop himself. The files called to him. He pulled out the drawer labeled Homicide, the sound of metal against metal ringing in the silence. He flipped through the files, each case bringing back a flood of memories. Then his hand froze. He found the file he was looking for, Caroline McDonald. The folder was old, its edges frayed, but the name still burned into his mind. He opened the folder carefully, his heart pounding as he read the case notes again. Everything was the same as he remembered. Her body had been found in her apartment, her throat slashed, the room covered in blood. No witnesses, no evidence. The only clue was the time of death, 3:33 a.m. But then, something caught his eye. A note, scribbled on the edge of one of the pages. It was faint, barely legible, but Harper could make out the words. Do you see the pattern? 3:33. He blinked, his breath catching in his throat. The note wasn't in his handwriting. It was someone else's. Someone who had worked on the case. Harper scanned the rest of the folder, but there was no more information. Nothing that explained the note, or why it had been added. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The room felt colder. The shadows seemed to press in around him. He had been looking at these cases for hours, but now, with a note in his hands, he felt as if something had shifted. There was more to this than just the murders. Someone was trying to send him a message. His eyes flicked back to the box of 333 files, sitting innocently on the desk in the corner of the room. He had to go back through them, every single one, to find out what the message was. Harper's heart raced as he realized the truth. He wasn't just a spectator in this story. He was part of it. Somehow, the murders, the time of death, everything had been connected to him. And the more he uncovered, the closer he came to discovering the part he had played in it all. Harper sat at his desk, his mind racing as the weight of the realization began to sink in. The coldness of the evidence room still clung to him, the shadows stretching and pulling at his thoughts. He had known something was wrong, something that didn't add up. But now, it felt like the walls of his own mind were closing in on him. The more he delved into files, the more certain he became that the answers were just out of reach. Every case he examined, every victim he studied, brought him closer to the terrifying truth. The truth that his own hands may have been responsible for the horrors documented in those files. Harper rubbed his temples, trying to push the thoughts from his mind. He couldn't focus. The guilt, the fear, it was all too much. How could he have been involved in something so dark and twisted without knowing? And what was worse, the sense of dissociation from all. The idea that his past had been locked away, buried so deep that he could no longer recall the person he used to be, the person who might have committed these crimes. He glanced over at the dusty box in the corner of the room, its contents like a ticking time bomb. The 333 files were more than just unsolved murder cases. They were a direct link to something Harper couldn't remember, or perhaps didn't want to. His eyes fell on the next file in the pile, marked case hashtag A005. The name Travis Keller was written in bold letters on the top. Harper's fingers trembled slightly as he flipped open the file, his stomach twisting as he read through the notes. Travis Keller had been a promising young man, a local businessman in his 30s, found dead in his office one fateful night. The body had been discovered by his secretary the following morning. He'd been stabbed repeatedly, the wounds brutal, the blood staining the floor beneath him. No motive had been found, no suspects, just an eerie silence surrounding the whole case. The details of Travis's death echoed with a chilling familiarity, and Harper's mind raced. The time of death, 3:33 a.m., the same as all the others. It was like an invisible thread pulling all these cases together, connecting victims who had no business being linked. But what was the connection? And why couldn't he shake the feeling that he had seen Travis Keller somewhere before? Suddenly, the image of a dark-haired man, a face half remembered from years ago, flashed in his mind. Harper's breath caught in his throat. It was Travis, but where had he seen him? His mind scrambled to place the memory, to pull it out from the fog, and then it hit him. Travis had been in a picture he'd seen in his own office years ago, back when he was still actively working cases. The man in the photo was standing with him and several other detectives, an old team photo from a cold case unit retreat. Harper had forgotten about that retreat, but now the image of the man in the front row, wearing a friendly smile, was as clear as day. Travis Keller. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. What was Travis doing in a photo with him? Was it just a coincidence? Or was there something more to it? Had they known each other? Had they worked together? Harper had no memory of it. His mind was a blank when it came to that time. He couldn't let it go. The feeling of connection gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into a rabbit hole he was afraid to enter. But he had no choice. He had to keep going. Harper stood, the chair scraping noisily against the floor as he gathered the 333 files and started flipping through them again, desperately searching for any link, anything that would help him make sense of what was happening. His eyes scanned each file methodically, desperate for any clue that would bring the pieces together. Then he stopped. One file caught his attention. Case hashtag A008. The name Ben Holt was scribbled across the top. It was another unsolved case, another victim found in the same manner as the others. But what stood out to Harper was the date of death, August 23rd, 1995. That date, it was important. Why? Harper's heart began to race again, the familiar sense of dread creeping up his spine. August 23rd, 1995. It was the day his entire life had changed. It was the day of the cold case unit retreat. He dropped the file, his fingers shaking as his mind reeled. That retreat, it was supposed to have been a bonding experience for the detectives, a way to build camaraderie, to deal with the strain of working high-stress cases. But Harper's memories of that retreat were hazy, fragmented. He couldn't remember much of it at all, except one thing, the face of a man he could not forget. The man in the picture, the man who had been murdered, Travis Keller. Harper's thoughts spiraled into chaos. The cases, the murders, the mysterious timestamp, 3:33 a.m. It all pointed back to that retreat, to that day in August when everything had started to unravel. Had something happened at the retreat? Had something occurred that had been buried so deeply that Harper had suppressed it for years? The truth was slipping through his fingers, just out of reach, and every file he opened seemed to push him deeper into the darkness. The cases were all connected, but what was the thread that bound them? And why was Harper at the center of it? His pulse quickened as he thought back to the strange note he had found in Caroline McDonald's file. Do you see the pattern? 3:33. Was it all pointing to him? Was he the one who had committed these murders? Or was there something else at play here? Harper was drowning in his own confusion, and yet he knew one thing for certain. He was running out of time. There was someone or something out there watching him, and if he didn't uncover the truth soon, it might be too late. Harper sat at his desk, the weight of his findings crushing him. The shadows in his small office seemed to stretch longer with each passing minute, the oppressive air thick with dread. He had uncovered the pieces, piecing together the puzzle, but the full picture still eluded him. He could feel his sanity slipping, as if he were about to fall into the same darkness that had consumed the victims whose files he had opened. It was 2:45 a.m., the same time the first case in the 3:33 files had been discovered. Harper glanced at the clock on the wall. Only a few minutes before the deadly hour, the chill in the air seemed to sharpen, and he suddenly felt a cold presence, as if the very room were alive with malignant energy. His hands trembled as he shuffled through the files one last time. There had to be something that could explain the strange pattern, the murders, the timestamps, the connection to his own life. But it wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about Harper's own past, the pieces of his life that had been torn away by a force he couldn't control. He was no longer just a detective. He was part of the nightmare. A soft knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. Harper. A familiar voice called from the other side. He froze. It was Chief Jacobs. Harper's heart hammered in his chest. Was he there to confront him? To accuse him of something? The room felt smaller, suffocating. Harper's mind raced as the knock came again, more insistent this time. "I'll be right there," Harper muttered under his breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. He stuffed the files into his desk drawer and rose to his feet, every part of him screaming that something was wrong. He couldn't let Jacobs see him like this, not with all the evidence pointing to him. But as he opened the door, what he saw left him breathless. Standing in the doorway wasn't Chief Jacobs. It was Travis Keller, the man who was supposed to be dead, the man whose murder had been chronicled in the 3:33 files. But how? "Harper," Travis said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "we need to talk." Video outro. The camera slowly zooms out as Harper stands frozen, staring at the man in the doorway. The haunting music fades in the background, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Voiceover, Mr. Darsnights. What Harper thought was the end of his investigation has only led to a new, horrifying chapter in his life. The man he thought was dead is standing in front of him, and the clock is ticking toward 3:33 a.m. But who is the true killer? Is Harper the mastermind behind the murders, or is there a darker force at work? The truth is out there, but is it something Harper can handle? The screen fades to black, and the following text appears. Thanks for watching. Voiceover continues. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales from Mr. Darsnights. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that keeps you up at night. And remember, sleep tight, but not too tight. There might be something lurking just beyond the shadows. The end.